We're going to hear from Crystal Alegria. She directs the Extreme History Project, which is a Bozeman nonprofit. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Anthropology and a Master of Arts in History from the Montana State University. She has worked in public history for 20 years. Crystal produces the Dirt on the Past podcast. Thank you. With her co-host Nancy Mahoney. And she recently co-produced a documentary entitled The Story of Us, the Women Who Shaped Montana. And with her is Sarah Rosenberg. She is a planner and the historic preservation officer for the city of Bozeman. She holds a Master of Science in Historic Preservation and an MA in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Colorado, Denver. Sarah works to evolve preservation policies and better bridge the gap between the protection of tangible heritage and intangible heritage.
Hello, good morning. I have hold a very special place in my heart for rural barns, railroads, and grain elevators, because that's where I started a lot of my survey work when I was down in Colorado and just all over eastern Colorado and southwest Colorado. So to me, seeing these is just really holds a special place in my heart. And I'm really, really appreciative of just like the foundation that was laid in the 1980s in Montana with these survey works and with this these efforts to look beyond the urban environment. However, we are in 2023 and still battling these same fights of like, what is historic preservation and how is it relevant? So this next session, we're going to be talking about building on the past for a more inclusive future. My name is Sarah Rosenberg. I am the Historic Preservation Officer as well as a planner for the city of Bozeman. I actually came to the city of Bozeman specifically as a planner to do development review. Very large projects, subdivision, anything like that. I have a master's in both. So when I got to take over the historic preservation program, I jumped right on the opportunity because my predecessor left, and this is what brought me, this is what I live for. This is the stuff, historic preservation, the community that makes it, that is what got me into it. So being able to kind of marry the two of like how things evolve in the future, but then also looking in the past, and especially in a place like Bozeman, was really important to me. So, as I said, we're going to Bozeman, not to the rules. So, what are the kind of the buildings do you think of when you hear historic preservation? So, not most of the time to the public, it's these kind of places. So, the Conrad Coors Mansion, did I say that right? Sorry, I'm from Bozeman. In Helena, Main Street, Historic District, Bozeman, Story Mansion, Bozeman. In my line of work, oftentimes I hear, well, that building's not worth saving, or that thing's not worth being saved because it's not pretty. It doesn't have any architectural significance. And I've really been pushing back, and actually we'll have tips on the phone about this. But, and so this is often to the general public what is thought of with historic preservation. Elaborate architecture, really beautiful building, economic epicenters. But this is what we are still trying to do to change this narrative and how people think about it. Not that these places and these buildings aren't worth preserving. We just want to make historic preservation relevant to more people. However, before we go a little into what we can do to kind of change this stuff, we're at a history conference, so I guess I should give some history. The City of Bozeman Historic Preservation Program, very similar to other places throughout the nation, and because of the efforts that were done in surveying in the 1980s, started around 1984, 1986, when over 4,000 properties were surveyed within Bozeman's kind of like downtown area. Yeah, a lot. I'm not part of it. I was not. Well, actually, these were the forms, you know, they were a lot smaller. You all have made them a lot larger, which is really great, but they take a lot more time. So we've had these 4,000 properties to be surveyed. And from these efforts in 1987, we established, there were 8 national historic districts. So we have Cooper Park, Bonton, South Black, South Tracy, Lindley Place, Main Street, North Tracy, and the Brewery. Most of these are residential zone districts, besides the Brewery and the Main Street Historic District, except the Brewery now mostly consists of residential. Since then, we've had 2 more added, which included the Story Mill Historic District, which is the really funky shaped one over on the left side. That's because it includes railroad. And then also, that was done in 1996. And then Montana State University, the pink one kind of down at the lower right-hand corner, which was in 2013.
Donuts.
Donuts? Is that weird? So from this effort, in 1991, the city developed the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, or the NCOD. In 1991, which is this pink line, and that was established by, or that was created. Anyone? I'm just gonna keep going. So that was established based on the 1954 census, and that boundary line was the one of the largest conservation overlay districts of its time. This was developed to support a sense of place and preserve the historic districts and the neighborhood character. And along with that, we adopted a local ordinance and created a historic preservation commission, which still exists today. Also in 1991, we became a certified local government with the state, and that was because it links the community's preservation goals to state and federal preservation programs. In 2019, we began the process of updating the survey, all 4,000 properties of them, since most of the data was extremely outdated and insufficient for modern use. This was done with my predecessor, and we emphasized on very specific areas of the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. But then when I took it over, I was like, well, what are we doing with this data? What's it like? What's coming out of it? We need to update it, yes, but like, what is it doing anything to shape our program, to shape our policies, to shape historic preservation in general? So I really just wanted to see, like, how can this survey assist us? Because we're not going to get through 4,000 properties. It's just not possible with what's happening in Bozeman. So, and a lot of this data that we have center around the traditional components of historic preservation. So what I was alluding to earlier, large houses, elaborate design, economic growth, and wealth. You can see this where a lot of the historic districts are laid out, which are on the south side, which was considered kind of the upper class area of Bozeman at the time. While the north side, which was considered our the working class area, only has 1 highlighted, or 2, well, 1.5 really, because a lot of the stuff in the Brewery district have been torn down. These survey efforts in the historic preservation program wanted to look more at the people that have made it the community rather than just the built environment. There is a movement in historic preservation at the national level that's called people-centered preservation, which expands beyond place-centered preservation. This document that I'm showing out there, it's called Preservation for the People. It came out of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in May 2017. I especially like it because it's like it's not thick. It's very easy to digest, and it's approachable to a lot of people. When they look at historic preservation, they're just like, that's technical, that's complicated. I don't know anything about architecture and buildings and the technical components of it. And so when they came out of this, although it was set on this, the foundation of the National Historic Preservation Act, which was established in 1964, and framed the work around preservation of the built environment, it focused entirely on the impacts of physical places. And so this has been the basis of the past 50 years. And so his people place is coming from that foundation. But what is it? A lot of times I'll be like, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what a lot of cities are trying to do. But like, what is it? So rather than solely focusing on place, people-centered preservation shifts focus to the people who have lived there and continue to live there. It goes beyond aesthetic and beauty. So I'm not a historian, but I really appreciate stories. And I know that they have a profound impact on our sense of identity and well-being. Historic preservation has not fully represented the stories of all Americans. And I know, especially as many of you are historians, I know you can understand how important it is to honor the diversity of the story and to ensure that everyone can see themselves in this narrative. One of these ways is through intangible heritage, such as highlighting things such as festivals, cultures, tradition, food, music, business. These are things that nurture our communities and is what makes it, if we make historic preservation emphasize on this type of heritage, the more equitable, healthy, vibrant, and resilient our communities can be. And we connect a place to these cultures. The more empowered our community can be, the more that they feel connected. Studies show that the more connected someone feels to their community or place, the healthier and happier they are. It can empower citizens to manage change in their communities and be more involved. People-centered preservation involves a lot of collaboration and partnerships. Existing historic preservation policies aren't always fully incorporated into work with related fields such as affordable housing, community development, economic development, and sustainability, building, anything like that. But we know how much they relate to each other. And preservationists since you all have been around as preservationists for a lot longer than I have been fighting this fight for a while to just try and be like, how can we not be so siloed from this decision making? But oftentimes historic preservation can be seen as a hurdle or rather than being an actual tool to help achieve community goals and focus on people. So did you know that less than 10% of sites listed on the National Register are affiliated with underrepresented communities? These are people of color, African American, Asian American, American Indian, Latino, LGBTQ plus community, and women. So as a planner and a historic preservationist, as someone who is balancing both of these things, this quote is something that really sticks to me. In historic preservation, planners need to raise the issue on how standards for preservation are subject to implicit bias and how we can learn to preserve historic architecture without displacing or erasing the history of our non-white communities. There are a lot of efforts happening out there, and especially in the last 5 years, there are places like Austin who are doing an equity preservation plan. There are studies, reports, really great books out there like Preservation and Social Inclusion that are just really trying to make this more apparent to everyone and saying like, hey, historic preservation can be more relevant. And so one of these things that I have especially been pretty fixated on that I really want to do with our historic preservation program are historic context statements. And these are narratives that identify important themes relevant to history and development of the built environment and community. Many cities, such as San Francisco, are taking this approach when evolving their historic preservation program, since it provides a basis for reviewing how properties can be evaluated for historic significance outside of the architectural significance of a building. It looks deeper into why places can be important and helps guide surveying of properties in our places. So kind of going back to just being like, we can just survey all 4,000 of these properties that we have, but like, what is that going to actually serve us? So how can we use historic context statements and branch to a larger community rather than just these like maybe traditional boundaries that we have a lot of our historic districts in, although, and there are a lot of cities out there that have been doing that, especially with like the African-American communities and actually like establishing these historic districts. But these historic concept statements can just like help guide us to looking at like, where are these areas that you can survey? So by evolving the historic preservation programs and getting people to think outside of the typical, we can raise different questions to connect people to their community. So what is Bozeman doing with a staff of one? Fortunately, we're actually going to be, this is something I'm extremely excited about. It's been about a year in the making and we're starting next month. Hooray. Is that we have hired a consultant to update our historic preservation policy and ordinance and to create a local landmark program. This ordinance, as I stated before, is specific to local government. And the focus is, it hasn't been changed a lot since it's established. Again, it has a great foundation, but it hasn't really kept up with some of the trends or the changes into, especially with Bozeman. It also doesn't really have a lot of teeth. So looking at just like, how can we be able to incentivize preservation and adaptive reuse rather than demolition? This local landmark program also is going to look into establishing local districts and landmarks that wouldn't necessarily fit criteria for the National Register, but are important to the Bozeman community. We are also looking to rebrand that neighborhood conservation overlay district, which now, because that was established in 1991, well, there are a lot of places outside of that boundary that should be looked at. We are also working on Bozeman's first equity and inclusion plan, which is creating a framework for implementation to make Bozeman a place where everyone, regardless of their life circumstance, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, can see themselves in their community and feel that they belong and can thrive. Then this past summer, we have been working with the Extreme History Project to update our historical narrative. The current historical narrative that is in our plans just really focuses on economic development and growth, not really the people. We did a lot of stakeholder workshops and one-off conversations to ask people of underrepresented communities, what were the narratives that have been left out of history? And what do you want to see in these? Well, this is a very big effort, and it's been told that we need to be putting this into 5 to 7 pages, which is very hard. And unfortunately, we get to have the Extreme History Project to be working with us on this. But from that, what I'm hoping is that although it's comprehensive in that plan, we can continue to expand upon these narratives with the historic preservation program, how that can better fit into our policy and how we can look into doing that through survey work and just telling our stories. So through both of these efforts, we can help implement strategies, policies, programs, and plans. And really, it's the historic preservation program as we are moving it to the future that can help with this. Now I am going to hand it over to Crystal Alegria to talk about one of the projects that we worked on last year that highlights some of these underrepresented communities.
Thanks, Sarah. My name is Crystal Alegria, and I work with the Extreme History Project, which is also located right there in Bozeman. And so Van and Sarah have really talked a lot about the big picture ideas and kind of what's happened in the past and where Sarah really wants to go in the future. But I'm going to talk a little bit about one project that we've been working on that really showcases everything they both talked about. So Sarah contacted me about 2 years ago, and she said, can you identify 13 properties that really represent the marginalized communities of Bozeman and really represent the Black community, the historic Black community of Bozeman? And I said, yes, I sure can. So,
oh yeah, thanks to SHPO for giving us the grant.
Yeah, thank you, SHPO. So many entities come together to help us do this work. And so we identified 13 properties. And, you know, I just want to say before I show you the map of where those were, it's really important for us to talk about the relevance of this place and talk about the history of the whole community. And of course, that's why we're wanting to look at some of these marginalized residences or places where people lived. So we identified 13 properties in this area that's in the red block here. And as you'll notice, if you know Bozeman, you'll see Main Street here right along the middle section. And this is Rouse. And so a lot of those districts were in the south part of Bozeman, but we wanted to really look at the north side of Bozeman. And so we looked at North Bozeman and North Black Streets, because that is where Bozeman's historic Black community lived, on those two streets on the north side. We did have a south side Black community as well, but those houses have been very well documented. So we wanted to resurvey some of these houses that had been surveyed in the 1980s, but hadn't been resurveyed since, of Bozeman's Black community. And so that is what we did. But I would love to talk to you about all 13 of those houses that we looked at, but I can't do that, don't have enough time. So we're going to just talk about one today. And we are really going to harken back to that idea of people-centered perspectives of history, like Van talked about first, and then Sarah talked about second, and kind of tell this story from that people-centered perspective. And so, of course, that's what I love to do, is tell stories. So I'm going to tell you a story to kind of finish up our talk this afternoon or this morning. So I'm going to tell you the story about this house, 516 North Bozeman Avenue. And this house is really special to me because the Robinson family lived in it for a time. So this house was built about 1900, and the Robinson family was a very prominent Black family in the Bozeman community during this early 1900s. So Andy Robinson and Eva Robinson purchased this property on January 3rd, 1918. Andy was born in Nashville, Tennessee. Eva was born in Texas. Somehow the two of them made their way to Montana, to Bozeman, Montana, and they got married in 1912. And then later that year, they had a daughter, Hattie. So daughter Hattie, Andy, and Eva moved into this house in 1918. But there must have been something not going right with the relationship between Andy and Eva, because they divorced later that year. So Andy got kicked out, and Eva and Hattie lived in this house. And then pretty soon, Eva's mother, Hattie, also named Hattie, moved in. So these three Robinson women, or actually Eva Robinson and her daughter, Hattie, and then Hattie Ellison, lived in this house together. And while they were living in this house, all two of the women, Hattie, the mother, and Eva, the daughter, worked in the service industry in Bozeman as domestic servants. They worked as maids in the Elks Club, and they worked in private houses as maids, and then worked in hotels as maids as well. So that's kind of what they did to make a living, because Andy was not supporting any of them any longer. So this is a photo of Eva, I should say Mrs. Eva Ellison, and she was quite striking, and I love that hat. And Eva was quite a force in Bozeman's Black community. And both Eva and her mother, Hattie, were very involved in the Montana Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. Eva served as president of the Bozeman Sweet Pea Study Club, which was a local chapter of the Montana Federation. So here's a photo of the Montana Sweet Pea Study Club taken in the early 1920s. And you can see Eva Robinson there in the middle, and her mother Hattie is probably in this photo as well, but we haven't figured out which one she is yet. So Eva was a real force in this club, and she was a force both in the Sweet Pea Study Club and actually in the State Federation as well. In 1922, Eva Robinson accompanied Mary Chappell, the Montana Federation president, to Richmond, Virginia, where they attended the National Convention of the Federation as delegates from Montana. So in 1924, Eva, still as president of the Sweet Pea Study Club, helped organize the 4th annual Montana Federation Convention, which was held in Bozeman and hosted by the Sweet Pea Study Club. And so this is a photo of the convention gathering taken at the Methodist Episcopal Church on Church Street in Bozeman. And I'm happy to say this building is still standing. The building they were standing in front of there is still there today, which is exciting. So the Robinson women lived in Bozeman, and they lived in this house until the late 1920s. And at that point in time, they moved to Salt Lake City. And we really don't know why they moved, but we can guess that maybe they moved to Salt Lake for better job opportunities, or maybe they moved to Salt Lake for a bigger, larger Black community to associate with, because the Black community in Bozeman was starting to dwindle at that time. And maybe they were thinking of Hattie and her marriage prospects, because in Montana, there was still an anti-miscegenation law. So maybe all those factors came into play, and they moved out of Bozeman in the late 1920s, and they ended up selling this house in 1937. So this house is no architectural beauty. It is a nice little house. It's 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, 834 square feet. Currently it's not on the market, but if it was, it sells for, Sarah, what was it, $600,000 in Bozeman. But this is not an architectural beauty, but this house really has the story. It has the story of these Robinson women who really played a role in the civic aspect of Bozeman, the religious aspect of Bozeman, and they really helped build this place that now we call home. And so it is, unlike the Story Mansion in its architectural beauty, but the stories that each building tells are equally important. So we don't have to save every building. I'm not an advocate for saving everything, but there's a few gems that we should hold on to, because these houses hold stories. And once these places are gone, sometimes those stories are gone as well. And it would be unfortunate to lose a story like the story of the Robinsons. So thank you everyone so much for being here today. And thank you to the organizers of this conference for inviting us to talk about our passions, as we love to do. And so if you have any questions for Sarah or I, or would like to connect with us after the conference, here is our emails and websites. Thank you so much, everyone.